අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා. අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා.
මුළු රටටම සැඟවුණු අවුරුදු උකුරහස.
Tonight, not important. Despite public expectations of a solution to the crisis, today's parliament debate focuses on other matters.
You don't have autocracy or authoritarianism in this country. You have to provide an explanation. Why was emergency brought in?
If he doesn't understand Sinhala, I can explain in English. If English is wanted.
Diffuse the tension. Protests continue for the 6th day straight as the UN Human Rights Council warns that it's got its eye on Sri Lanka. Ups and downs. The Asian Development Bank warns Sri Lanka's economic growth will dip to 2.4% this year, but inflationary pressures will moderate in 2023. On the verge. Depreciation pressures threaten a shortage in essential drugs as hospitals left with minimal stocks.
At the moment, ladies and gentlemen, we can function as the normal because we have to a certain extent the drugs and surgical consumables for another 1 month period.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Wednesday, the 6th of April, 2022.
Introducing New Hellmann's, the world's #1 mayonnaise brand, now in Sri Lanka.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Bringing you the latest news from across the island tonight, this is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. First up in Parliament today, hopes for a consensus across the political divide and some semblance of a solution to the economic and public crisis heating up the nation were unfruitful today as government and opposition members chose to focus on other issues. With the state of emergency having been revoked last night, the opposition called for the scheduled vote on the decision to go ahead regardless and urged the government to provide a detailed explanation to the House on why it took the decision. This resulted in a heated exchange across the aisle between opposition leader Sajit Premadasa and Leader of the House Dinesh Gunawardena. Meanwhile, the government also announced today that despite calls for the resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa by protesters across the country, the head of state has no intention of doing so as he still enjoys a public mandate.
The revocation of the declaration of a state of emergency by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa as of midnight last night was taken up in the House today, with the opposition members calling for the vote that was expected to take place today to go ahead regardless.
I raised the issue of the emergency proclamation being approved by Parliament yesterday, and I raised it at the party leaders meeting also. Honourable Leader of the House stated that it will be put to vote today. Now, revocation of the emergency proclamation has no bearing on this. Whenever emergency is proclaimed, that must be approved by Parliament. Subsequent revocation has no bearing on that. Government may be running scared to have a vote taken in Parliament, but they can't escape from the constitutional duty of having the emergency proclamation placed in Parliament and a vote taken on it. So I'm insisting, now that the standing orders have been suspended, I'm insisting that we put to vote the proclamation of emergency as made by the President on the 1st of April 2022.
I'd like to reply to the doubts created by Honourable Sumandran. At the party leaders meeting yesterday, Honourable Sumandran did raise this issue, and on behalf of the government I very clearly stated that the emergency regulation will be tabled in the House today. Yes. Vote can be taken any other day. We know the constitutional provisions and we know when it will lapse. But the question was whether the emergency regulation will be placed before the House. It has been read by you, Honourable Speaker. The second regulation was last night. The Security Council, chaired by His Excellency the President, met and revoked so that it does not exist any longer from midnight last night. We know the constitutional provision. I agree with you that the emergency has been on for 2-3 days. So that basis we have placed the emergency regulation. The other new regulation also will be placed before you, Honorable Speaker. We can't run government in the way you want. We will run according to the Constitution. I agreed and I assured that we will conduct the business of the House according to the Constitution. Not on the whims and fancies of we all.
With that, a heated exchange took place between Leader of the House Dinesh Gunawardena and the opposition leader Sajith Premadasa when he called for the government to provide a detailed explanation to the House on the reason for the declaration of emergency.
Honourable Speaker, I would like to associate myself with the sentiments of Honourable Sumandiran. Actually, this administration brought about emergency, curfew, banning of social media as a draconian attempt to bring in dictatorship into this country. You don't have autocracy or authoritarianism in this country. This is a democracy. The Leader of the House should understand. You have to provide an explanation. Why was emergency brought in? Why was curfew enacted? Why was social media banned? What is the reason? Just because you had a mandate of 6.9 and 6.8 million votes, you can't act with impunity. You can't act with impunity. You can't behave in an arbitrary manner.
Now
you can't act like a dictator.
Yeah, it's okay, right.
So you owe an explanation.
I owe and I explained to him. I explained to the whole House why it was promulgated. If he doesn't understand Sinhala, I can explain in English. If English is wanted. ජනාධිපතිතුමාට ගේ නිවසට පාර දුණු අවස්ථාවේ සිට මුළු සිද්ධි මාලාවම කිව්වා. දැන් මොකක්ද අනේ you owe an explanation කියලා. මොනවාද මේ හැසිරීම? වගකීමෙන් හැසිරෙන්න ඔබතුමාලා වගේම මහජන ජීවිතය ගැන අපි මහජන ජීවිතය වෙනුවෙන් මේ කටයුතු කරන්නේ. කලබල ඇති කරන්න නෙවෙයි.
Meanwhile, issuing an extraordinary gazette last night, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa revoked the state of emergency that was in effect from last Friday, imposed to maintain public order and security. Meanwhile, the people of the country continue to carry out protests across the island, marking 1 week since the first protest took place in Mirihana last Thursday.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa declared a state of emergency on the 1st of April, citing the need to maintain public security, public order, and the maintenance of supplies and services essential to the life of the community. Last night, however, the President issued another Gazette Extraordinary revoking the Gazette issued last Friday, thus ending the state of emergency. The state of emergency was imposed last Friday after protests that began at Jubilee Post Junction in Mirihana carried on towards President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's private residence, resulting in injuries to protesters and police personnel, as well as damage to public and private property. Meanwhile, the protesters that began in Mirihana last Thursday have now gained traction and expanded across the country, as the people have continuously taken to the streets for 1 week against the lack of solutions to a worsening economic crisis. Similar to the day before, various protests were carried out in front of the residences of parliamentarians. Last evening, protesters gathered in front of the residence of the leader of the National Freedom Front, Vimal Veeravansa, located in Hokandara. However, the protest has been a peaceful one with no reports of violence or damage of property. In the meantime, another group of protesters marched to the residence of the Sri Lanka Bodhajana Perumana parliamentarian Marjan Falil in Beruwala. However, as the peaceful protest started to become violent, the Beruwala police had intervened and forced the crowds to disperse. Elsewhere, the residence of former State Minister P.L. Nishantha, located in Narudgama, was also the target of a march by protesters. However, the police managed to keep the protesters from getting close to the residence with the use of barricades. Meanwhile, a number of state institutions including the Ceylon Electricity Board, the Bank of Ceylon and the Ministry of Education carried out peaceful protests in front of the respective offices today. In the meantime, similar to yesterday, another peaceful protest was carried out today by civil society organizations along the Parliament Road. As the people continued to gather, the police immediately took measures to barricade the approach towards the parliament.
The UN Human Rights Office has urged Sri Lanka's authorities to diffuse tensions peacefully after a state of emergency was declared in response to protests over the country's deepening economic crisis. It added that the organization is keeping a close watch on the situation at present. The UN Human Rights Office yesterday urged Sri Lanka's authorities to diffuse tensions peacefully after a state of emergency was declared in response to protests over the country's deepening economic crisis. The OHCHR said that the situation has worsened and that there have been shortages of food and fuel, along with power cuts prompting new protests by desperate Sri Lankans. Commenting on the emergency declaration, OHCHR spokesperson Liz Throssell expressed concern that such measures are aimed at preventing or discouraging people from legitimately expressing their grievances through peaceful protests and that they frustrate the exchange of views on matters of public interest. Speaking to media in Geneva yesterday, Throssell added that this has led to further protests by Sri Lankans left desperate by the rising cost of living and difficulties to obtain basic items. Commenting on reports of excessive and unwarranted police violence against protesters, the OHCHR has also reminded the Sri Lankan authorities that measures related to states of emergency must comply with international human rights law, should be limited to the extent strictly required by the situation and be proportionate to it, and should not be used to stifle dissent or hinder peaceful protests. The situation will be closely watched by the UN Human Rights Office, Throssell added. This was echoed by the Deputy Spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, Farhan Haq, who told journalists at a regular media briefing that the UN's team in Sri Lanka is closely following the situation. As parliamentarians drew attention to masked military riders who arrived at the protest near Parliament yesterday, MP Manusha Nanakara raised his concerns on the matter, saying that such situations would give birth to state-sponsored terrorism. Meanwhile, parliamentarian and former commander of the Sri Lanka Army, Field Marshal Sarath Fonseca, also condemned the incident and called for an unbiased investigation into the matter.
Last evening, a group of people had staged a protest in front of the entrances of the parliamentary premises during the parliamentary session. As more protesters gathered at the location, the police had swiftly taken measures to barricade the entrances to the parliamentary complex. Meanwhile, as the protesters continued to gather at the Parliament Road, armed military personnel riding unregistered motorbikes and with their faces covered had ridden towards the crowds. This led to tensions increasing among the gathered protesters. With that, police personnel on duty at the time attempted to stop and question the military personnel. Following this, Commander of the Sri Lanka Army General Shavendra Silva had called on the Inspector General of Police C.D. Vikramaratne to carry out an investigation into the conduct of police personnel. In response, the IGP had apologized over the incident and stated that an unbiased investigation regarding the matter will be carried out. Meanwhile, the matter was taken up in Parliament today as well when leader of the main opposition Sajith Premadasa called on the government to provide answers on who these masked individuals were.
ඊයේ දවසේ අපි දැක්කා විවිධ පිවිසින් දොරටු අසල සාමකාමී උද්ඝෝෂණයක මේ රටේ පුරවැසියන් නිරත වෙනවා. එසේ නිරත වෙනකොට අපි දැක්කා බොහොම භයංකාර දෙයක්. අපි දැක්කා මාස්ක්ස් ඇඳගත්තු, යුනිෆෝම් ඇඳගත්තු. ඒ වගේම unregistered bikes, weapons අරගෙන ඒ උද්ඝෝෂකයෝ ඉන්න තැන්වලට ගිහිල්ලා පොලිසියත් එක්ක වාද විවාද වෙනවා. පොලිසිය ප්‍රශ්න කරනවා ඔබලා කවුද? කොහෙන්ද ආවේ? මොනවටද ආවේ? මොකද නීතිය හා සාමය ආරක්ෂා කරන්නට ඕන අපේ රටේ ඒ පොලිසිය. මම දැනගන්න කැමති කවුද මේ මෝටර් බයික්ස් වලින් ආවේ? නම්බර් ප්ලේට් නැති මෝටර් බයික්ස්. ඒක වෙනම කණ්ඩායමක්ද? වෙනම කල්ලියක්ද? වෙනම රහසිගත හමුදාවක්ද? අපි දැනගන්න ඕනේ මේවට උත්තර.
In response, Minister of Highways Johnston Fernando had this to say.
සජිත් ප්‍රේමදාස මැතිතුමා කිව්වා මෝටර් සයිකල් වගේක් ගැන මම හමුදාපතිතුමාටත් කතා කරුවා. ඒකේ නම්බර නැති කියන නම්බර දෙක දෙපැත්තෙම ගහලා තියෙනවා. හමුදාපතිතුමා කිව්වා අද වහාම ඉස්සරහට ගහන්න යොකල් ඔය මෝටර් සයිකල් ටික විපක්ෂ නායකතුමනි කොවිඩ් කාලේ ගියාම දැන. ඒ නිසා එහෙම කිසි දෙයක් වෙන්න දෙන්නේ නැහැ.
Meanwhile, SJB MP Manusha Nanakara then raised concerns over the incident, saying that allowing such masked individuals to operate would only give birth to state-sponsored terrorism.
ගරු කතානායකතුමනි මම ඔබතුමාගේ අවධානයට යොමු කරන්න කැමතියි මේ වගේම බයික් ඇවිල්ලා තමයි අපේ ලසන්ත වික්‍රමතුංග මහත්තයාව මරලා දැම්මේ. දැන් එදා මේ මිරිහානි සිද්ධියේදීත් මේ වගේම වෙන කණ්ඩායමක් ආවා. මෙතන තියෙන්නේ බරපතල ආරක්ෂාව පිළිබඳ ප්‍රශ්නයක්. මොකද මේ අය ඇවිල්ලා മന്ത്രിවරු එළියට යන වෙලාවට වෙඩි තියලා යන්න පුළුවන්. මේ ඉන්න අහිංසක මිනිස්සෙකුට වෙඩි තියලා යන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද මූණ ගැලෙව්වෙවත් නැහැ. අර වෙත්තසිංහ කියන පොලිසියේ මහත්තයෙක් එයාව නැවැත්තුවා. යතුර ගත්තා. අරගෙන මේක මූණ අඩු ගානේ අරින්න බැලුවා. ඒක කරන්න දුන්නේ නැහැ. දැන් මේ වෙනකොට පොලිසියෙන් මේ නිලධාරීන්ට විරුද්ධව පරීක්ෂණයක් කරන්න තීරණය කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වෙලාවෙම හමුදා පතිවරයා පොලිස්පතිවරයාට කතා කරලා තියලා තියෙනවා මේක ගැන පරීක්ෂණයක් කරන්න කියලා. දැන් කොහොමද හමුදාපතිවරයාගේ නියෝගයක් එන්නේ පොලිස්පතිවරයාට මේ පරීක්ෂණයක් කරන්න කියලා. ඊළඟ කාරණාව දැන් ප්‍රවෘත්තියක් සමාජ මාධ්‍යවල යනවා. ශාගි ගාල්ලගේ නැමැති පුද්ගලයෙක් නමින් පවත්වාගෙන යන වෙබ් අඩවියක් හෝ මොකක් හරි Facebook ගිණුමකින් පොලිසිය හමුදාවෙන් ගුටි කෑමට නියමිතයි කියලා. මේ බරපතල තත්ත්වයක් නිර්මාණය වෙන්නේ. මේ ප්‍රශ්නෙත් එක්ක මිනිස්සුන්ට ගැහුවා. මාධ්‍යවේදීන්ට ගැහුවා. මාධ්‍ය වලින් කරන ප්‍රචාර නතර කරා. සජීව විකාශයන් තහනම් කරා. මේ යන තත්ත්වය ඉතාමත්ම බරපතලයි. මේක රාජ්‍ය ත්‍රස්තවාදයක් දක්වා යන්න පුළුවන් නන්නාඳුන කල්ලි වලින්. මේක නිසා මේකට රජයක් විදියට වහාම උත්තර දෙන්න.
In the meantime, parliamentarian and former commander of the Sri Lankan army, Field Marshal Sarath Fonseca, said that he does not condone the presence of the army during a protest and called for an impartial probe into the matter.
And we'll be back with more local news right after this break, so stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. The drug shortages have been reported from several hospitals across the island, leaving them unable to perform routine surgeries as well as other treatments. Some hospitals in Colombo say that they only possess stocks sufficient for a month or two. The State Ministry of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals says that a cabinet paper seeking 15 billion rupees from the Treasury to import medicinal requirements has been prepared. However, the ministry is unable to present it due to the absence of a cabinet.
At the moment, the ongoing foreign exchange crisis has not only affected the country's power sector, but the country's health sector as well, with the shortage of essential drugs for treatment. During a protest held today at the base hospital in Bibile, the hospital staff have alerted the public to a serious shortage in drug stocks sufficient for only 2 weeks, and also revealed that surgeries have been halted due to this. The same sentiments were expressed by staff of the District General Hospital in Amilipitia, who complained that even basic necessities such as saline was in short supply. Further, the Government Medical Officers Association has also revealed that normal surgeries at the District General Hospital in Hambantota have been halted as well, and currently only emergency surgeries have been prioritized. What's more, the National Hospital in Colombo and the Teaching Hospital in Peradeniya have also allegedly been affected by the drug shortage. Meanwhile, this afternoon, the Government Medical Officers Association held their own protest in front of the Ministry of Health in Colombo, calling on the ministry to provide solutions to drug shortages. The association also accused the former health minister and other relevant authorities of failing to take timely action to prevent the emergence of this drug shortage despite forewarnings. In the meantime, we spoke to some hospitals in Colombo to confirm these claims. Director of the Lady Ridgeway Hospital, Dr. G. Vijay Surya, called on the public to not panic as the hospital has sufficient drug supplies that will last for at least a month.
At the moment, Lady J Hospital, we can function as the normal because we have to a certain extent the drugs and surgical consumables for another 1 month period. That somehow we have communicated with the Director General and Medical Supplies Divisions regarding supplies in future needs. At the moment, we are functioning all our surgeries as well as in-house management. Most probably, our requirements will be supplied by the Ministry of Health in due course.
Meanwhile, speaking to Director of the National Institute of Mental Health, Dr. Dhammika Vijayasinghe, revealed that the hospital has enough stocks for the next 2.5 months. She added that the hospital has already informed the Ministry of Health of this situation and requested for a continuous supply of medicines to ensure smooth operations at the hospital. In the meantime, Deputy Director of the Colombo South Teaching Hospital in Kalubovila, Dr. Rukshan Bellana, also offered an update on the drug availability at the hospital.
Several drugs are out of stock, but most of the drugs are available. They are still providing the services. Surgeries are performed. More drugs are available than what is in short or in out of stock situation.
Although some hospitals report sufficient drugs for the moment, the situation can quickly escalate if supplies aren't refreshed soon. Speaking to AdaDerana English News, Secretary of the State Ministry of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Saman Ratnayaka, stated that 65 billion rupees has been allocated by the Treasury to import essential drugs. However, due to the dollar depreciation, this has led to some serious complications due to the obvious higher drug prices. With that being the case, a request has been sent to the Treasury for a further 15 billion rupees to make up for the difference in the import bill, and a cabinet paper too has been prepared by the ministry. However, the ministry is unable to present the paper due to the absence of a functioning cabinet at present. Dr. Ratnaik added that the World Health Organization assistance has also been requested to import the country's drug requirements.
Meanwhile, Koo Yoon-cheol, the Minister for Government Policy Coordination of the Republic of Korea, who was on a 3-day official visit to Sri Lanka, called on the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor G.L. Piris, earlier this week. During the meeting, the visiting minister highlighted that Sri Lanka has been listed as one of Korea's high-priority countries for overseas development assistance allocations. Further, the Korean government is also willing to provide more employment opportunities for Sri Lankans.
Minister of Foreign Affairs Professor G.L. Piris met with the Minister for Government Policy Coordination of the Republic of Korea, Koo Yoon-cheol, during a 3-day official visit to Sri Lanka last week. During the meeting, the two ministers discussed the scope of bilateral relations between the two countries and explored ways to further strengthen and maintain friendly ties. The meeting was also attended by several senior officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including the State Minister for Regional Cooperation, Tarka Balasurya, and the Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Admiral Professor Jainath Kolomage. During the meeting, Minister Piris extended Sri Lanka's appreciation to the Korean government for the extensive support extended so far through loan assistance under the Economic Development Cooperation Fund and grant assistance via the Korea International Cooperation Agency. Minister Piris further emphasized the challenges Sri Lanka is currently facing with regard to its external budget, and both parties agreed to work together to further enhance collaboration in mutually beneficial sectors. The Foreign Minister also expressed his severe gratitude on behalf of the government of Sri Lanka for providing a conducive working environment for approximately 22,000 Sri Lankans employed in Korea under the employment permit system. During the discussions, Minister Koo Yoon-cheol explained that Sri Lanka has been listed as one of Korea's priority countries for overseas development assistance allocations. He added that the Korean government has already focused on providing more employment opportunities for Sri Lankan migrants, considering the prevailing situation in the country. During his stay, Minister Koo also paid courtesy calls on President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, and also met with the former Minister of Finance Basil Rajapaksa, former Justice Minister Ali Sabri, State Minister of Skills Development, Vocational Education, Research and Innovation, Sitharame Pola, State Minister of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Channajaya Sumana, and several Korean businessmen in Sri Lanka.
Meanwhile, the Consumer Affairs Authority has warned gas retailers to stick to market prices without selling at higher prices to consumers. It warns that legal action will be taken against such wrongdoers, and raids are underway in search of these retailers. Meanwhile, the Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka says that it has supplied over 270,000 metric tons of various fuel types under its line of credit extended to Sri Lanka.
Unloading of a 40,000 metric ton diesel shipment that came under the Indian credit line began at the Colombo port today. Further, another diesel shipment from the same capacity is expected to arrive in the next few days as well. According to the Indian High Commission in Colombo, India supplied over 270,000 metric tons of various fuel types under the line of credit provided by them. Though there is a fuel supply to the country from the Indian credit line, the dollar shortage has led a 37,500 metric ton diesel shipment ordered by the CPC to stay anchored in the Sri Lankan waters. The Ministry of Energy said that they were still unable to secure dollars to clear the shipment. Meanwhile, on power, 6.5-hour power cuts approved by the Public Utilities Commission will continue until the 8th of April due to the low fuel availability to operate thermal power plants. In the meantime, a tanker carrying 3,800 metric tons of LPG arrived in Sri Lanka last night and its unloading began today. Recently, Litrogas assured that there will be no gas shortage in the market, as they have taken steps to import a 30,000 metric ton LPG shipment for the month of April. Meanwhile, following several public complaints that the gas dealers charge prices higher than the market price of a cylinder, the Consumer Affairs Authority intervened into the matter today. Issuing a media communique, the CAA said that the retailers must not charge prices higher than the market price or refuse to provide gas stocks to the public by hoarding them. It says that the authority has started island-wide raids in search of retailers and warned that legal action will be taken against the wrongdoers.
Now, the ADB has projected Sri Lanka's economic growth to dip to 2.4% in 2022 and improve marginally to 2.5% in 2023. It warns that in the absence of access to sustained balance of payment financing, foreign exchange reserves will continue to be limited and external sector vulnerabilities are likely to persist. The Asian Development Bank's annual flagship economic publication has forecast a muted recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic as Sri Lanka's economy grapples with macroeconomic challenges arising from high debt, low foreign reserves and inflationary pressures. The ADB has projected Sri Lanka's economic growth to dip to 2.4% in 2022 and improve marginally to 2.5% in 2023. The Asian Development Outlook 2022 report observed that even as the Omicron variant of COVID-19 subsides, the country is facing several headwinds. These include rising food, fuel and commodity prices, higher import prices, supply chain disruptions, shortages stemming from the foreign exchange squeeze, demand-side pressures and exchange rate depreciation, which will drive inflation higher in 2022. According to the report, inflationary pressures are expected to moderate in 2023 as global prices fall and supply constraints ease. ADB Regional Economic Advisor for South Asia, Rana Hassan, observed that a strong vaccination drive helped Sri Lanka's economic activity recover from the impact of multiple COVID-19 waves, with tourism, one of the worst-hit sectors, gaining strength at the turn of this year. Hassan added that at the same time, strong growth is being held back by Sri Lanka's debt overhang, large external financing requirements, energy shortages and high inflation. Immediate measures to restore macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability are crucial for recovery to gain traction, he warned. Further, the report says that underlying macroeconomic weaknesses, the pandemic's lingering impacts, energy shortages and external shocks pose downside risks to Sri Lanka's economic outlook. In addition, it warns that in the absence of access to sustained balance of payment financing, foreign exchange reserves will continue to be limited and external sector vulnerabilities are likely to persist. The implications of the Russian invasion of Ukraine will also be seen through higher oil and food prices as well as reduced tourism and export earnings. Welcome back. The Colombo Bourse ended in the red today, ending with its highest gains seen in a week as it closed 1.8% lower to end at 8,590 points.
The all-share price index ended in the red today as the market closed 157.15 points down to end at 8,580.93. Meanwhile, the S&P SL20 of more liquid stocks ended 74.74 points lower to close at 2,797.52. Overall market turnover was 1.9 billion when the market closed today. Globally, the Nasdaq slumped 2% today as tech stocks extended their sell-off for a second straight day on mounting concerns over aggressive actions by the Federal Reserve to fight inflation, with minutes from the central bank's March meeting on tap. High-growth stocks whose valuations stand to be pressured by higher bond yields bore the brunt of the benchmark's 10-year high yield hit a 3-year high. Meanwhile, oil futures edged lower today following a surprising rise in US crude stocks and after news that large consuming nations would also release oil from reserves in conjunction with the United States to counter supply worries.
And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us tomorrow at the same time. Good night.